The Vanker Family of Manderston by Farida Parak, assisted by Saleem Vanker. January 2023. Varn Ph 2 Ph. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. All praise be to Allah, and may His peace and blessings be upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad. The perfect way of life, which was taught to us by the Honorable Rasulullah over 1400 years ago, included guidance on every aspect of our lives. Moreover, it was taught to us that through following His way of life in the prescribed manner, we will be able to earn Allah's eternal happiness and paradise, inshallah. One of the aspects of our lives that were often stressed upon by our beloved Nabi was our relationship with and conduct towards our family members. Aisha reports that Rasulullah said, "The tie of kinship is suspended to the arsh throne of Allah," and says, "He who unites with me, Allah will unite with him, and he who severs me, Allah will sever him." Sahih Muslim 4635. It is in this spirit of building the bonds between family members, who over time have drifted apart in this fast-paced world, that this gargantum project was undertaken. It was no easy task collecting, compiling, arranging, editing, checking, and rechecking many times over the information which is presented here. Our gratitude goes to Allah who has made this possible, and may He reward all those who, in any way, contributed to this endeavor. Every effort has been taken to ensure the accuracy of the genealogical information provided. Additionally, the oral history we have relied upon is subject to human error and the effects of time on memory. Where different sources have provided us with conflicting accounts, we have endeavored to use the most probable and/or agreed-upon accounts. Your understanding and forgiveness for any incorrect information provided will be appreciated. May Allah shine His light of mercy on our departed marhums, on our elders, our youngsters, and upon all the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu. Jazakallah to all those who assisted in the compilation of this family history, including those who were instrumental in initiating this project and providing much of the information in it. Ameen. If you have any questions, comments, corrections, or queries, please feel free to contact pmbwonderkids@gmail.com. 3ph4. Page. My great-grandfather, Ahmed Vanker, lived in a village in India, Kathor, district of Surat. He owned a small farm and produced sugarcane, millet sorghum, and some fruit, including mangoes, papaya, and coconuts. He had 4 or 5 sons and a daughter. The farm was productive, but not enough to sustain the family. The sons grew up and had a different plan for the future. The only daughter was married to a businessman in Rander, a nearby village. When the boys didn't show much interest in the farm, the family decided to sell the property in Kathor to the Variawas and move to Mumbai, known as Bombay at the time, where the boys attended school and madrasa. They lived in a small dwelling close to the mosque. Musa was the eldest son, born in 1882, passed away 1952. He was very bright and worked hard at school, where he excelled in mathematics. He worked for a storekeeper after school and learnt bookkeeping. His dream was to travel and have his own business one day. The imam of the mosque near to their home was Mr. Kaji Saheb. He was Hafizul Quran. He hailed from Kolwad, another village not far from Kathor. He had 3 or 4 daughters. One of them was married in the Vaid family from Mota Varachia. Another was married to a very wealthy businessman from Varachia, Mr. Barmania. One was married into the Dadabai family from Lahore. The youngest was Hafiza, 1891 to 28th June 1979, who was to become my grandmother. Musa, 1882 to 6th April 1952, completed a diploma in bookkeeping while his brothers found various jobs in the city. Mr. Kaji Saheb admired Musa's diligence and matched him with his youngest daughter, Hafiza. She was young, very talented, and well-educated in Islam. Musa was punctual with his salah and had a secure job with a Gujarati man who owned several businesses in Mumbai. Some of Musa's friends were talking of moving to South Africa in search of greener pastures, and he was very keen to join them. He saved as much as he could for this trip. When Mr. Kaji, the imam of the local mosque, heard that Musa is moving to South Africa, he invited the Vanker family to his family home in Kolwad, where they were introduced to his lovely daughter, Hafiza. The Vankers were thrilled and really taken aback by the beautiful girl, Hafiza, that was presented to them. It was agreed that Musa was to marry Hafiza, the imam's daughter. Preparations were set in motion for an engagement function. Musa was set on going to South Africa and promised to return in a few years to wed and fetch his future bride. As soon as Musa had accumulated sufficient money, he booked a passage to South Africa, together with a Bayat friend and another friend from Wallachia. There was also a Rawat friend from Surat that joined them. Mr. Bayat and Mr. Rawat had relatives in Pietermaritzburg. 5. The trip in third class by ship to Durban was long and tiresome. Upon arrival in Durban, they were received by their various relatives from Pietermaritzburg, and thereafter traveled by train to Pietermaritzburg. Mr. Rawat joined his family at a trading store in Pietermaritzburg, very near the railway station. The Bayat family in Pietermaritzburg were hospitable, and they welcomed the men from India. The families were pleased to receive letters and gifts from family and friends in India. They talked late into the night, sharing stories of the families that remained in India. Musa Vanker had visions of having his own store, so while he worked for the Bayat family in Pietermaritzburg, his eyes were open looking to purchase a business himself. He was lucky to locate a small business at Mercy Halt near Howick that was for sale. Musa packed his few belongings and hired a horse and cart to take him to Mercy Halt. Accommodation was not a problem because he was prepared to live in the store. The store was close to the main railway line between Durban and Johannesburg, and the train stopped briefly near his store. Many travelers to the Transvaal stepped off the train to support him at his store. They would purchase provisions for themselves for the long journey to Johannesburg. While at Mercy Halt, he became popular with many people on the way to Johannesburg. They supported his small business in the few minutes that the train waited to offload and load passengers. It was not long after that he got word of Kasim Parak, who bought a business in Thornville at an auction and was in a position to sell the business. Mr. Parak never owned a business, but attended auctions and bought anything of value that he knew he could sell at a profit. Musa Vanker had cash that he had accumulated at Mercy Halt, which allowed him and Kasim Parak to conclude a deal. He was able to take over the store in Thornville that included a dwelling. Business was good, and with the help of his good business acumen, he earned well. A farmer at Nell's Rest, Bainsfield, not far from Thornville, employed many Indians on his sugar cane and cattle farm. The Indian families were finding it difficult to sustain themselves without Indian groceries. Musa Vanker established contacts with wholesale merchants in Durban that imported Indian groceries. Thus, with supplies from K. Haribai and V. N. Naik, he was able to provide Indian groceries to the farm workers. The farm workers were pleased to find all their provisions under one roof and close to them. It was now time for him to write to India and get his brothers to join him at his lucrative business. His brother Hussein was the first to arrive in South Africa, and 6 PAGG, they formed a wonderful partnership. The time had come for Musa to return to India, get married, and bring his beautiful bride back to South Africa. With regular correspondence, he was aware that Hafiza was getting ready to relocate to South Africa. The wedding arrangements were set in motion, and Musa boarded a ship to Mumbai. Relatives were at the docks in Mumbai to receive him. There was loads of excitement. He had brought letters and gifts from South Africa for numerous families in India. Sweets, chocolates, and baker's biscuits were sought-after treats in India. India was the producer of the best clothing and shoes, so Musa did not bring any of these to India. With his savings from South Africa, there was sufficient money to cover his mahr, dowry, and purchase some gold jewelry for his bride. He bought a heavy gold set and Kangol's bangles from a jeweler in Mumbai. He had some excess cash left over for his parents and the families that he had left behind in India. He had tailor-made suits for his brothers for the wedding. Arrangements were in place for the Vanker family to go to the village of Kolwad, to the Kaji family home. On the route to Kolwad, they stopped over in Kathor, their former home village, where they received the news of the tragic death of the bride's sister. She was recently married and passed away soon after the birth of her first child. This child was left in the care of Hafiza, while her father, Mr. Dadabai, returned to Lahore. The Kaji family elders agreed that Hafiza cannot get married and leave Kolwad while she is taking care of this newly adopted child. There was disappointment in the Vanker family, who had prepared well in advance for the wedding to take place. Musa Vanker, being the intelligent man he was, agreed that he would take this child as his own and bring her with his new wife to South Africa. Because of the death in the Kaji family, the wedding festivities were scaled down to a simple nikah ceremony. Hafiza had prepared an array of 12 beautiful sets of clothing with beadwork and embroidery. There was a fashionable outfit for every occasion, with matching pants and dupattas. Everything was displayed for the guests to admire. Her family gifted her with all sorts of kitchen utensils, including pots, pans, spoons, graters, steam pots, and every other item she would ever need in her own kitchen. She was barely 16 years old at the time of her marriage. Her adopted baby became fond of her new parents immediately. Nobody would doubt that it was not their own child. Travel documents were arranged. Within a few months, they were ready to depart from India to South Africa. There was endless amounts of happiness and excitement among the families, some sadness as well to see them leave with the little baby girl. A cradle was made in India for the baby to take to South Africa, and it was subsequently used by the couple's other children. 7. PH. The trip in third class was not a walk in the park for them. It was a long journey. The child had to be bottle-fed. Upon arrival in Durban, they hired a truck to cart their luggage to Thornville. They arrived in Thornville on a cold winter's day. However, the bride had summer clothes for herself and the baby. The creative and innovative Hafiza was able to put together hand-stitched winter clothing for herself and the baby with fabric from the shop. Musa later bought her a foot-pedal-operated treadle sewing machine. Winter weather was no longer a problem for the mum and child. The baby they had adopted was lovingly nicknamed Gori. Musa's brother, Hussein, awaited for the arrival of Musa. He also had to return to India and come back with his bride, a Kasu girl from Surat. This marriage was pre-arranged for him at a young age. He returned the following year with his bride, Momin, and two of his brothers, Esop and Mohammed. In India, it was every young man's dream to go to another country. Soon it was time for brothers Musa and Hussein to leave their two brothers, Esop and Mohammed, in Thornville and establish another store in Manderston, not far from Thornville. One business was not sufficient to sustain four brothers and their families, so the establishment of a store in Manderston was through necessity. Musa Vanker's fourth-generation family still own the store in Manderston, known as Vanker Brothers. Musa attended auctions in Pietermaritzburg and purchased second-hand building materials. He found Indian artisans and built a large trading store close to the railway 8PH station in Manderston. The building was wood-framed on a brick foundation. It had corrugated iron cladding on the outside and wood paneling on the inside, all second-hand. It was the cheapest method of building, as materials were scarce at the time, considering it was during the First World War, 1914 to 1918 war. We are told that even the nails and screws used were second-hand. South Africa was still a developing country back then. Many building materials were imported from England and were of superior quality that it could withstand the South African environment. The building stood for over 100 years with minimal maintenance. Immediately behind and attached to the shop were two separate living quarters for the brothers Musa and Hussein, together with their families. The simple dwellings consisted of two large rooms on either side with a common kitchen, bathroom, and dining area linking the two sections. The dining room was used occasionally for visitors and on Eid day. It had a large table with many chairs, a wash-hand basin where water had to be filled daily to wash hands. Then came the children. Manderston had no running water nor electricity. Toilets were outside. There were water tanks to harvest rainwater and two very weak boreholes where water had to be pumped by hand. Fortunately, there was labor easily available. It did not cost much to employ a washerwoman for the laundry, a domestic worker for cleaning, and another for yard work. Wood had to be chopped for the stove and for heating water. As trains were the only means of transport, shop supplies came by rail from either Pietermaritzburg or Durban. There were two horses in Manderston that pulled a cart to bring goods from the station. 9 PAG. When Hussein returned from India, his wife was already pregnant. Hafiza's baby was due in April, and Momin's baby was due in November the same year. They found out that there was an Indian lady in Umlas Road, a neighboring village, that was a nurse cum midwife. Musa sent a messenger on a bicycle to locate this nurse. He sent her some money so that she could come by train and check the expecting mothers. She came as arranged and checked the two ladies and confirmed that she will return in April. True to her word, she arrived by train in Manderston on the 1st of April. They had to arrange a sleeping area for the nurse in a little space between the kitchen and dining room. She was vegetarian, so special meals had to be prepared for her, and she took her meals on the back veranda. She turned out to be a wonderful person and massaged the expecting mothers daily. She told them of a man in Umlas Road. She knew him as Suleiman Hansrod, who ran a taxi service. In case she encounters any problems with the delivery of the babies, the taxi can be called by the messenger on his bicycle. The taxi could ferry the person to a doctor in Camperdown in case of complications. Fortunately, all went well, and in 5 days, Hafiza went into labor. The nurse was in the house. The husband went into the shop to fetch a blanket while the baby was being born. Not a sound came from the mother until she saw her son and said in Arabic, "All praise be to Allah." She had been praying for months for a healthy baby, whom they named Abdullah. He grew up to be very intelligent and handsome. The nurse remained with the family for a week and went back home laden with money and many gifts. Musa went to Pietermaritzburg to fetch an ajam, barber, to shave the baby's hair and have him circumcised. 2 sheep were purchased for the traditional akika. Relatives came from Durban bearing gifts for the baby and had a big feast in Manderston. The visitors also brought news of a relative from India that was due to arrive on the next ship and will be coming to Manderston. 10 ph. Mr. Dawood Barmania is married to Hafiza's sister and had decided to come to South Africa to open a business in Umzimkhulu. He was very wealthy and came with lots of money and gold as well. They arrived in Manderston by train and after 3 days made arrangements to go to Umzimkhulu by ox wagon. Provisions were packed and they left for the 2-day journey with 2 small sons. Their daughters remained in India. Their marriages were arranged. One was to marry a Motala and the other to a Vaid cousin from Warakia. The boys were very young, but their marriage partners were already chosen. Mr. Dawood Barmania went to India frequently as his wife and daughters were in Warakia. His wife did come to South Africa but missed the family in India. One of her daughters, Hafiza, was born in Umzimkhulu and went to India when she was around 5 or 7 years old. The 2 boys went to school in India. After completing school, both of them graduated with degrees from a prestigious college in Calcutta. Their mother initially came to South Africa, but returned to India after a few years. The generations that follow will be discussed later. The wife of Musa Vanker, Hafiza, was affectionately known as Afuma by everyone in the family. During the following 20 or 30 years, she had around 10 children, born every 15 or 20 months. She had 5 sons and 5 daughters, with 1 son passing away in infancy. Ibrahim, 13th September 1925 to 23rd September 1927, passed away at age 2 and is buried in Manderston. In the other side of the Manderston house, Hussein Vanker's wife had children every 2 years or so. The children of Musa and Hafiza, Afuma Vanker, age order is subject to correction. Fern Abdullah, B.O. 5th June 1910 to 31st May 1963. 6 Ahmed B. 10th July 1916 to 27th April 1997. Sekov Khadija, 7th April 1913 15th February 1987. 7th Fatima, 31st of December 1984. 3rd Ghulam Muhammad. 8th Hawa Bibi, 11th June 1922 to 20th April 2007. 4 Ayesha, 17th July 1914. 9 Abdul Haq, 5 Amina 10 Abdul Hamid Qasim, 6th May 1928 to 15th January 1996, 11 Page each. We also have to add the child that they had adopted in India, who was known as Gori Appa, Hussein Vanker's family. His wife belonged to the Kasu family from India. His sons were 1 Ahmed Chota, 1900, married Gori Appa, the girl that Afuma adopted prior to her marriage to Musa Vanker. 2 Abdul Qadir, 11th March 1910, married Ayesha Chodi Appa, daughter of Musa Vanker and Afuma III. Ismail, 20th June 2015 to 1st January 1972. Initially married to a Hafaji, they had one son, Mohammed Iqbal, Babu, to 21st May 2018. He later married Zubaydah Motala to 14th December 2017 and had a son, Esop, Speedy, and a daughter, Ayesha Gori. The four, Dawood, Uncle D, 15th November 1920 to 14th February 1987, initially married Hajra Asmal and had 3 children. He later married a Christian woman, Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Peters had children from a previous marriage and later 2 daughters from Dawood. One of them is a doctor in Australia. Hussein Vanker's daughters were 1. Fatima, 25th December 1904, married a Vanker from Prince Edward Street, Durban. Hawa, 7th October 1906, married a Vaid. She was Sadak Vaid's Kachamart mother 3. Mariam, July 1908, married Ibrahim Vada from Ladysmith 4. Amina, 15th December 1912, married Abdullah Charles Vanker. 5. Sarah, 12th March 1923, married Ibrahim Vada from Ladysmith when her elder sister Mariam passed away. Afuma was a 16 or 17 years old bride when she arrived in South Africa with her adopted daughter. She was very talented and well educated in Islamic studies. She did not know any English and knew very little Zulu. However, she could read, write, and communicate in Urdu and Gujarati. Afuma received newspapers in the post from India and was up to date with world news. As their sons grew up, they traveled by train to school in Pietermaritzburg. They enrolled at the Mohammedan Oriental (MO) school and madrasa that was next to the mosque in Upper Church Street, which was very near to the railway station. Once they finished primary school, they enrolled at York Road Government School, which was later to become Woodlands High School. Remember, in those days, very few people went beyond Standard 6, which is equivalent to our Grade 8 today. 12. PAGH. Also worth noting was the concept of double promotion. If you were good in your class, they moved you up to the next grade during the year. Some learners changed grades more than once in a year. It was common for a learner to reach Standard 6 in 3 or 4 years of schooling. Unfortunately, the girls remained at home and did not attend school. Afuma taught them to read and write Urdu and Gujarati and also to read the Holy Quran. These included the girls from the other side of the house, daughters of Hussein Vanker. She taught them many Islamic basics like how to read Salat. The girls learned to make their own clothes as well as embroidery and beadwork. Afuma taught them to cook as well. As soon as the girls were of marriageable age, it was time to get them married, and they did not look very far. Gori Appa, the adopted girl from India, married Ahmed Chota, son of Hussein Vanker, from the other side of the house. Amina, Apama, daughter of Hussein Vanker, married Abdullah, eldest son of Musa and Afuma. Musa's daughter Ayesha, Choti Appa, married Abdul Qadir, son of Hussein Vanker. Musa Vanker was very hospitable as he entertained guests, including cousins, relatives, and friends from Durban and Pietermaritzburg regularly. One of Afuma's nieces was married to the Vaid family from Westville. Afuma entertained them often in Manderston, and the girls in Manderston enjoyed the company of the Vaid girls. I do not remember the name of the Vaid lady, but we called her Buri Boo. Bari Boo had 5 daughters and a son. 1. Bari, 2. Naliben, Sarah, 4. Khadija, 5. Bibi, 6. Ismail Teen. PAG. Bari and Sarah married 2 Randari brothers that had just arrived from Nairobi in Kenya and were looking for work in Durban. Mr. Vaid did not hesitate to offer his very talented daughters to the good-looking Randari boys, Mohammed and Suleiman. They were not well off, but were very handsome with flaming red hair. The 2 sisters were happily married and had numerous children. Naliben married Esop Parak, uncle of Musa Parak. They had 2 daughters, Sher Banu and Zubaydah. Unfortunately, Esop Paruk passed away tragically in a motorcar accident. Naliben, then another Paruk. Khadija married Sadak Vaid, who was also a cousin. Ismail married a Locket woman. Bibi studied medicine at Wits University and qualified as a doctor. She later married a Dr. Locket. Word got around about all the talented and beautiful Vanker girls in Manderston. Thus far, there had been a couple of small weddings in the house between first cousins. That tradition continued when their children married among the family as well. The Barmanias from Zimkulu came with a proposal for Afuma's daughter, Khadija, Bari Foy. M.A. Motala, a wealthy Durban businessman, also proposed to Amina, Gorifoy, Afuma's daughter. A big double wedding was planned in Manderston. It was a wedding to remember for many years to come for all the people invited. Cooks were brought from India, especially for this wedding. They prepared meals and the mithais for the guests. Accommodation arrangements were taken care of by the Motala and Barmania families. They chartered a train from Durban that stayed at the railway siding in Manderston. The guests slept on the train, stationed in Manderston, and used all the railway facilities on the train. Not long thereafter, Mr. M.I. Kaji, a prominent businessman, proposed for his son Ibrahim to marry Fatima Bibi Foy, daughter of Musa Vanker and Afuma. Yet another wedding was held in Manderston. The Kajis were from Pietermaritzburg. Their son, Ibrahim, was well-traveled and had just returned from a trip to London. He became known as London Kaji. Ahmed was my father. When all his brothers gravitated towards Durban one after the other, he remained in Manderston to help his father Musa Vanker in the Manderston shop. My mother, Ayesha, was the granddaughter of Dawood Barmania and the daughter of Ghulam Hussein Ismail Timol and Hafiza Barmania, my Nanima, who was also the daughter of Dawood Barmania. Abdul Haq married Hajra Motala, who was also the granddaughter of Dawood Barmania, originally from Mota Varakia in India. 14 Ph. Hawa Bibi married Mr. M.A. Peer. The youngest brother, Abdul Hamid Qasim, married Ayesha Asmal, the daughter of a prominent Durban businessman. Ghulam Mohammed married Fatima Barmania, also the granddaughter of Dawood Barmania. Afuma had many sisters in India. I do not know their names but recall whom they were married to. 1. Vaid from Varachia or Kathor. 2. Dadabai from Kolwad. 3. Barmania from Mota Varachia. 4. Thorawa from Mauritius. Abdullah, the eldest son of Musa Vanker. Abdullah grew up to be a brilliant student who excelled in school and madrasa. He wrote letters to India in Gujarati. He often wrote letters to the editor of the local newspaper. He used the pen name ABC when his letters appeared in the newspaper. When he left Manderston, he would write letters to Afuma in Gujarati. When he reached marriageable age, his parents matched him to Amina, Apama, daughter of Hussein Vanker, from the other side of the house. Apama happened to be a very good cook and very hard-working, just like the rest of the girls from the Manderston household. But like the rest of the girls, she did not have the opportunity to go to school. It was customary at the time for parents to arrange marriages for their children, leaving the children with little or no choice. Unfortunately, 2 of their children were born with chest problems. It could have been asthma or bronchitis. They passed away very young, around ages 5 or 6. They are buried in Manderston. Another child of theirs, Muhammad, passed away in a freak accident. His pajamas caught alight when he went close to the fire used to heat water in the bathroom. He was not burnt badly, but passed away of shock. He was also buried in the family graveyard in Manderston. Their daughter, Ruqayya, was a lovely, bright young girl that wanted to attend school from an early age. She was sent to live with her grandmother, Nanima, in Durban. She was not in Durban for very long when they sent her back to Manderston, saying that she had a serious throat infection. She could not breathe because of blocked airways. She died of diphtheria not long after that. 4 of Abdullah's and Apamabas' children are buried in Manderston, together with Ibrahim, son of Afuma, and Musa Vanker, who passed away in infancy. 15 Pag. Very suddenly, Abdullah packed his bags and left Manderston without notice. He remained at large for many months until he wrote a letter to my father saying that he had secured a lucrative job in Vryheid. But he made no inquiries about his wife, who was expecting another child. Vryheid at the time was closed to Indians, and no Indian was allowed to work or live there. Letters were sent to Abdullah, informing him of his daughter Ruqayya's death and the imminent birth of another child. Further letters were written to him informing him of the birth of Zora, 20th November 1943, his youngest daughter. He did not respond until some months later, when he sent some money to Manderston for the erection of a fence around the burial site of his 4 children, Fatima, Mohammed, Farouk, and Ruqayya. Apama's daughter, Zora, was born in May Street, Durban, at her grandmother's place. She did not see her father until late in life. Zora grew up in Manderston, not having known her father. Abdullah would send money to Afuma in Manderston sporadically, but never made mention of the wife and daughter that he had abandoned. He occasionally sent letters to my father, his brother Ahmed. These letters were few and far between. Afuma would write to him telling him of the approach of Ramadan and Eid al-Adha. Sometimes he would send money for Qurbani, but never mentioned for whom. Other than my father and his mother, he severed contact with everyone else. Probably around a decade after his disappearance from Manderston, he informed the family of his planned visit to Manderston. My father picked him up from the railway station in Pietermaritzburg. There was lots of excitement in Manderston, and Apama even prepared his favorite dishes. Unfortunately, being away from the Indian way of life, he could not eat spicy food. He sat with my father and talked into the late hours of the night. Early the next morning, he was ready to return to his mysterious home, so my father took him to the Pietermaritzburg railway station. During the brief time he spent in Manderston, he did not interact with his wife Amina Apama and his daughter Zora, whom he had seen for the very first time. My mother tried her utmost to get him to bond with Zora, but he just brushed her aside. At this point, he mentioned that he had a very well-paying job in Ogies. He said he was managing a trading store for a Jewish person and had assumed a new identity. He was now classified as European, and his name was Alfred Benjamin Charles, Albin Charles. That was the pen name, ABC, he had used many years earlier when he wrote to the editor of the local newspaper. Since he was now classified as white, he was afraid to be seen in the company of Indians. In all the years that he was away, he probably visited Manderston 2 or 3 times. He kept the Manderston family in the dark regarding his personal life, but did mention that he was earning very well where he was. Zora grew up to be a beautiful and hard-working young girl. She learnt to sew, and after school she would assist in the tea room in Manderston. Zora enjoyed pop music, 16. P.A.G. was very kind-hearted and good-natured. As was custom among our community, she received many proposals for marriage from family. Afuma wanted Zora to marry her grandson, Ahmed, son of Ghulam Muhammad Vanker. Family elders had agreed to this union, but Zora was not happy. Ahmed was good-looking and often came to Manderston with a friend in a new car. Nobody was certain whether he had a liking for Zora, and Zora refused to marry him, which in fact upset the family elders. Zora later married Farooq Variawa from Durban. One day, my father received a phone call from a stranger in Johannesburg informing him that a certain Mr. A.B. Charles was very ill in hospital and did not have any next of kin. The lady that knew him went through his belongings and found correspondence between him and my father. She somehow managed to trace the phone number for the Manderston family and sent a telegram to Manderston confirming that Mr. A.B. Charles had passed away in hospital in Johannesburg. Johannesburg General Hospital was a European-only hospital. Together with my parents, I accompanied my husband, Sadek Parak, to Johannesburg to try and retrieve the body of the deceased Mr. Abdullah Vanker, A.B. Charles, and bring his remains back to Manderston and to have a dignified funeral with the family. Sadek insisted we take Zora with. We left early the next morning for Johannesburg and reached late that afternoon. This was in May 1963. I was pregnant with my son Mohammed at the time. There was no GPS or mobile phones in those days, so we phoned a family who were distant relatives and asked them to meet us at the hospital. As soon as we met them, they took us ladies to their flat in Market Street, Johannesburg. They were very kind to us, gave us a well-deserved meal while the men were tried to find the correct section of Johannesburg General Hospital. They searched endlessly for the correct department. When they did find the correct place, they were not allowed beyond the security gates into the European section. The hospital authorities refused to listen to my father's explanation that the deceased was his brother. They eventually ended up with Mr. Mayet that had some connection with the hospital authorities. After showing them photographs and the letters between my father and the late A.B. Charles, they were allowed into the morgue to identify his body. We were all taken to the residence of another distant relative, the Dadabai family, to spend the night. The men returned in the early hours of the next morning. Meanwhile, the whole family had gathered in Manderston in anticipation of the janazah. There was no way that we could have brought the deceased back to Manderston, as the two men amongst us were not acquainted in this type of things, especially in a strange town. The Johannesburg families very kindly advised us not to stress ourselves, since it was already 5 days since the person had passed away. And moving him to Pietermaritzburg was going to be risky because the deceased was officially a European in terms of his paperwork. And if we were stopped by police on the way to Manderston, we would have very little chance of the police accepting our story. The Mayet family 17 PAG assisted us in having the funeral at their place, and our uncle Abdullah Vanker was buried in Johannesburg. Upon our arrival back in Manderston, the families whom had gathered were not happy with our decision to have the burial in Johannesburg. They wanted the funeral in Manderston. Everyone had different arguments. Why didn't you hire a private hearse to bring the janaza to Manderston? Couldn't you air freight the body to Natal? And it went on for a few days. All praise to the Almighty, they all settled down to recite a Quran Khatam for 2 or 3 days and then returned home. Amina Apama continued to read Quran Khatams for her late estranged husband until her demise many years later. She never complained about the fact that he had abandoned her. Life continued for her in Manderston. She was responsible for the cooking in Manderston. My parents were involved in running the shop while Apama took charge of the kitchen. When anyone came to the kitchen, meals were always ready for them. The wood and coal stove was started early in the mornings by one of the helpers. Apama would prepare mealie meal porridge in a big pot for everyone for breakfast. That included the workers in Manderston. The workers were given a bowl of porridge, 2 slices of bread, and a cup of tea. We had a choice between fried eggs or tea and buttered toast. My brothers preferred cornflakes while my parents had eggs and leftover curry from the previous night. Fresh food was prepared daily for lunch and supper, and rotis were freshly made daily. Apama also did some simple sewing for the locals with fabric bought from the store. When my brother Farooq was born, I was sent to live with my nanima in Durban. They enrolled me in Bibi Kaji's school. I was around 6 years old at the time. Bibi Kaji ran a nursery school in Fountain Lane, Durban. I started madrasa at Kalas in Carlisle Street. My elder brother, Aziz, went to a proper school also in Durban. 18 PH. In Manderston, Gori Appa, the adopted girl that came with Afuma from India, grew up to be an attractive lady. When she was 16 years old, the family matched her with Ahmed, Chota, eldest son of Saleem Vanker, from the other side of the house. Everyone was happy that she remained in the family and in the house. Chota remained in Manderston for a while and then moved to Durban with his wife, Gori Apa. They lived in May Street and were blessed with beautiful children, mostly girls, and the youngest being a boy. Gori Apa's daughters were 1. Gori married a Dadabai from Vereniging 2. Hawa Bibi married a Sidat from Ladysmith 3. Mariam Bibi married a Kathrada. 4. Amina married Mohammed Vada Tiger from Ladysmith. 5. Hajra married a Dokrat from Landon. 6. Hussein married a Vada from Ladysmith. When Gori Appa passed away, Chota married an Asmal widow. She had a son from a previous marriage, Farooq Asmal. They had many children together, 2 daughters and 3 or 4 sons. One son was known as Copper and is now settled in Canada. Musa Vanker and Afuma's eldest daughter, Kathija Barifoy, married Ahmed Barmania from Zimkulu. They had 2 daughters and a son. 1. Sarah married Ahmed Chota Badat from Ixopo. 2. Amina Banji married Mohammed Vanker, Bai or Baila. Bai was the son of our Choti Appa. 3. Abbas Banji lived in May Street with Choti Appa for many years until she separated from Bai. When her sister Sarah passed away, Banji married Sarah's widower, Chota Badat from Ixopo. Sarah had 3 sons and a daughter. They wholeheartedly accepted Banji as their new mother. She was their mother's sister. Banji was very fond of her sister's children, most likely because she had no children of her own. She developed a wonderful relationship with the children. 1. Qasim. 2. Suleiman, Sali. 3. Dawood, David. 4. Ruqayya 2. Brothers married 2 sisters and live in Ixopo. One brother is in Johannesburg and their sister Ruqayya is in Durban. Ahmed Barmania's son, Abbas, studied medicine at the University of Fort Hare and qualified as a doctor. He opened a practice in Kimberley and has been there for many decades. Dr. Abbas remained a confirmed bachelor for many years and married 19 PAG when he was in his 40s. He married Fatima, a Kimberley resident. They have two sons. Musa and Afuma's daughter Amina, Gori Foy, married Ahmed Motala, son of A.M. Motala. I know little about Mr. Motala other that he was known as Bossy Motala among his friends. I must have seen him about 3 times in my life. We do know that his father, M.A. Motala, was a very wealthy businessman in Durban. Gori Foy was very close to us. She looked a lot like her mother, Afuma. She was small-built. They always lived in a flat, first in Cathedral Road in Javri's building, and then later in Cross Street in the Motala building. After the death of her husband, she moved to a small flat in Morningside, Durban. Gori Foy had 5 daughters. Her eldest daughter, Ayesha, was a lovely girl that passed away when she was still a teenager. I think she had asthma. 1. Ayesha, late. 2. Fatima, Ben Gori. 3. Zora married a mullah. 4. Farida married a Lokat. Fauzia divorced and now single Hussein Vanker's son, Abdul Qadir, also lived in May Street. He was married to Ayesha Chodi Appa, daughter of Musa Vanker. They had 2 sons and a daughter. 1. Mohammed Bai or Baila. 2. Fatima Bibi. 3. Abbas Bai was married to Amina Banji, daughter of M.A. Barmania and Arberi Foy. Bibi never married. Abbas married Munira, and they have 2 children, Enver and Nadia. Enver is in Australia, while Nadia is married to Zubair Esak, formerly from Pietermaritzburg. She looks just like her grandmother, our Chodi Appa. Nadia has a few children. Bibi's health was not the best, and she needed much attention in the latter years of her life. Munira attended to her after the demise of her mother, Chodi Appa. Bibi was bedridden towards the end of her life, and Munira was always by her side. Bibi also had some strange food preferences. Abbas is very religiously inclined and lives a very modest lifestyle. They live in Durban. Afuma's daughter Fatima Bifoy was my favorite aunt. She was a happy-go-lucky person who always laughed. She was very beautiful and married Ibrahim London Kaji, son of a wealthy businessman. He was always well-dressed and worked as a traveling representative for AI Kaji. In those days, they were known as travelers. They lived at their family home in Wilson Street, off Upper Church Street in 20 PH Pietermaritzburg. Their Wilson Street home was our base in Pietermaritzburg. We were regular visitors there whenever we went to Pietermaritzburg from Manderston. Their home was always full of visitors. The mother-in-law was in a small and liked to entertain family at her home. Ibrahim was one of 3 brothers, Ismail and Kasim being the other 2. Their sister was Zubaida. Kasim's sons owned Textrim. 2 other sisters were married and left the house. One was married to a Kaji from Angwadi. Their son, Abdul Khalik, was married to a Rawat and became a famous restaurant owner. Ismail married his cousin, Ayesha Kaji. Fatima Bifoy had 3 sons and 3 daughters. 1. Mohammed Iqbal passed away in a drowning accident in Durban Bay, 17th April 1989. 2. Mohammed passed away very young, under 50 years old. 3. Yusur. Ayesha Gori married Mulana Mullah, 12th February 2020. 5. Khadija married Mohammed Hanif Kadwa from Port Shepstone 6. Yasmin married Babu Vada from Ladysmith. Khadija was undergoing heart bypass surgery when she passed away in the operating theater. Ayesha Gori passed away very recently, 2020. Baifoy's husband was called Haji Moda. Some people called him London Kaji. He passed away very suddenly and left his family destitute. They were living in a flat at the time. The 2 elder daughters were married. Iqbal had left home. Mohammed was 16 or 17 years old. Yusuf was still in primary school, and Yasmin was still a baby. They had nothing to live on. Bifoy sent Mohammed to work for his uncle in Lundy's Hill and left Yusuf with her mother-in-law. She took the infant Yasmin and went to live with her brother in Mayville. As soon as Mohammed was a little older, Bifoy arranged with her husband's former employers, AI Kaji in Durban, to allow Mohammed to continue in his late father's job. Mohammed was taken on by AI Kaji, and he proved himself very capable. The family were then able to move back to Pietermaritzburg. My father had built a rental house in Bombay Road, Northdale, Pietermaritzburg, and Bifoy made inquiries if she could rent the house from my father. My father agreed, and they moved into the house as soon as it was ready for occupation. Bifoy was once again independent, living on her own. Yasmin went to school, which was walking distance from there, so was the mosque, madrasa, and high school. The time had come for Mohammed to get married. During his travels as a representative, he met Fazila Mayet in Dundee. They married soon afterwards. Fazila lived together with Bifoy and Yasmin. Just prior to Mohammed's wedding, Bifoy had a little accident. She slipped and fell outside their home. She spent many months in and out of hospital, nursing a fracture in her leg. 21 ph. I lived not far from Bifoy, and it was my duty to take her to hospital whenever necessary. At one time, it was almost once a week. I regularly sent food for her when she was not mobile or in pain. On Fridays, I went to her place and assisted her with the cooking. She always prepared many dishes on a Friday. Although she had her own style of cooking, she never objected to my ways. Bifoy was very active. She did a lot of sewing, and I often sent her simple sewing to do for me like pants, burqas, and slips. She had a friend whom we called the walking taxi. Whenever Bifoy needed to go anywhere, Choti would take her on the bus. She also ran errands for Bifoy between her place and mine. Choti would do the regular fruit and vegetable shopping for Bifoy. After her leg injury, she was unable to do much. Fazila, the daughter-in-law, took charge of the kitchen and turned out to be a great cook herself. Her mithais and burfi were the best. Yasmin did well in school, but unfortunately, the family could not afford for her to enroll for further education. Yasmin soon married Babu Vada and moved to Ladysmith. They have 2 children, a son and a daughter. Mohammed had 2 sons and a daughter. Fazila has been a very good mother to her children, and they have all done well. Mohammed, although he was a humble traveler/representative for most of his life, he was very friendly with many influential Muslim business people in Pietermaritzburg. Mohammed's son, Ibrahim, is a senior manager with the Save Hyper Group in Pietermaritzburg. He is a keen sportsman with many comrades' marathon medals in his collection. Ibrahim has taken part in many races abroad as well. His daughter is also into sports. She had completed the Duzi Canoe Marathon in 2021. Ibrahim lives in a new prestigious suburb of Pietermaritzburg, the Victoria Country Club estate. Ayesha Gori had 2 sons, Aslam and Mohammed, and 2 daughters, Nasrin and Nafisa. The Kaji grandchildren have all turned out to be very intelligent. Khadija had only 1 daughter, Sarah, and a son, Ahmed. Sarah is a doctor, and she married a doctor. Ahmed married a widow from Cape Town. Khadija's husband, Mohammed Hanif Kadwa from Izotsha near Port Shepstone, was devastated upon her early demise. He sold up his trading store and moved in with his daughter in Durban. Iqbal can be described as intelligent, brilliant, and at the same time naughty. He worked as an assistant at an attorney's office. He was not an attorney, and was well versed in law. He once represented a client in court and won the case. Iqbal spent many years outside South Africa, mostly in Europe. He passed away tragically in a freak accident when his car rolled into the bay in Durban. Yusuf was very bright in school. He lives in Pietermaritzburg. We meet him sometimes at the Sufi Mosque in East Street, Pietermaritzburg. 27 AG. Afuma's youngest daughter was Hawa Bibi Choti Foy, 11th June 1922 to 20th April 2007. Under the tutelage of Afuma, Choti Foy became an amazing dressmaker. She had clients from throughout the Midlands and was always very busy with her sewing. She saved her money and bought the latest automatic sewing machine available at the time. When my mother became pregnant for her 4th child, Ibrahim Babu, Choti Foy took over caring for my younger brother Farooq, taking care of his every need. He was just a couple of months old, and my mother was not in the best of health. The locals in Manderston assumed that Farooq was Choti Foy's child. He even slept with her in her bed. When she had a marriage proposal, she was worried about leaving the young Farooq behind. The family convinced her to accept the proposal from Mr. M.A. Peer to 13th July 1979 from Durban. She was concerned about her suitor as she was around 32 years old, while Mr. Peer was in his 60s and the father of about 10 children. Some of his children were already married. 3 of his former wives had passed away, and the people that knew him said that although he was not rich, he was a wonderful person. Considering that Hawa Bibi was beyond marriageable age, she consented to the marriage, and a small wedding was held in Manderston. She took her sewing machine with her to Durban, where she shared a home with her stepchildren, 3 daughters and 2 sons. The stepdaughters were very hard-working and were able to take care of the household chores. Choti Foy made a very good stepmother because she loved children. Mr. Peer had a small shop near the market in Victoria Street in Durban. Choti Foy once visited the shop and was horrified to find old, outdated clothing on the shelves. Some of the stock was damaged by rats. She hired 2 ladies to clean out the shop. They dumped out most of the damaged and outdated stock and replaced it with the latest fashions. Choti Foy began to sew some simple items like aprons to sell in the shop. Business immediately took a turn for the better, and within months, they were able to get their children married. Choti Foy made the wedding outfits for her daughters, and she made an outfit for me since I was a bridesmaid at one of her daughters' wedding. Soon, she had 2 children of her own, and they had saved up enough money to buy a house in Asherville, Durban. Mr. Peer was a very good husband and father. Business was good, and their sons started their own businesses and progressed well. Choti Foy's own children are Musa, Babu, and Rukaya. Rukaya married Saleem Tamal and was widowed recently. Babu is married to Suraya. Rukaya has 2 children, a son and a daughter. 23 PH. Musa Vanker's son, Ghulam Muhammad, Gorabai. Gorabai left Manderston for Durban and worked for Silver Shoe Store, a very fancy shop in central Durban. The parents arranged for him to marry Fatima Barmania, Das, 13th May 1985, daughter of Muhammad Barmania from Zimkulu. They were blessed with 2 sons, Dawood, a 5th September 1935, and Ahmed, 1936 to 29th January 1983. Dawood looked very different from Ahmed. Although the Barmanias traded in Zimkulu, they retained ties with their family in Varachia in India. Fatima grew up in India at the family home. Her grandmother was also Afuma's sister's daughter. Her father, M.A. Barmania, studied in Calcutta, India, and graduated with an M.A. degree in economics. When Fatima married Gorabai, they lived in a flat in Savile Street, Durban. They later moved with their sons to a house in Tills Crescent in Mayville, Durban. This is where the sons grew up. Mayville became our family home in Durban. Whenever we went to Durban, we always stopped there first, especially on a Sunday. Gorabai loved children. He called all the girls Aishi, and all the boys were Johnson. Whenever we went to visit, he would take us to the local shop and buy us whatever we wanted. We would walk back from the shop with an ice cream in one hand, a cold drink in the other, and a packet full of sweets in between. Gorabai would never say no to children. It was not only family children, the neighborhood children as well. Ahmed joined his father in the family business. Unfortunately, Dawood passed away, presumed drowned, when he was still a teenager. He went with a group of friends that were training to be lifesavers and disappeared on the beach. His remains were never recovered. Gorabai hired divers to look for the body of Dawood, but was not successful. He spent hours on the beach for many weeks expecting the body to surface. Dawood's mother refused to go anywhere near the beach ever since then. For as long as she lived thereafter, she did not see the sea even though she lived in Durban. Ahmed married Hawa Patel, and they had 3 sons and a daughter. They are all married now and have children of their own. The children were very young when their father passed away. Ahmed was in his mid to late 40s when he passed away. His sons were all as good-looking as him. My father, Ahmad Vanker, 10th July 1916 to 27th April 1997. He married a family girl, my mother, Aisha, 3rd December 1920 to 29th July 2004, daughter of Ghulam Hussein Ismail Timol, my nana, and Hafiza Barmania, my nanima. My father was the middle of the 5 sons of Musa Vanker, Abdullah, A.B. Charles, and Ghulam Muhammad being elder than him. He was born in Manderston in 1916 when the family moved from Thornville to Manderston. He took over the running of the family business when he left school. The 2 younger brothers moved away to Durban, looking for greener pastures. They found opportunities in the big city where they could earn 24 PAG better than they could in the family shop in Manderston. The Manderston shop was barely surviving, and they were unable to draw money from an already ailing business. The Manderston household was big. The people in Manderston were popular with relatives, and the visitors kept coming to Manderston every weekend. The youngsters from Durban loved the Manderston farm life. They were free to play outside, ride bicycles, and climb trees, something that they could not do in Durban. Apama spent hours in the kitchen, catering for the visitors from the city. My grandfather was very hospitable, while Afuma loved visitors, with the result that the shop could not sustain itself. The business began to experience financial difficulties, while their lifestyle remained the same. My father worked very hard in the shop and did not draw a salary or buy anything substantial for himself, like a second-hand car. He also planned to leave Manderston, but was begged to remain by my grandfather, Musa Vanker. My father agreed to continue to run the business in Manderston, provided that certain conditions were met and agreed to by the rest of the family. Firstly, he said that he will do things his way. Since the business was in arrears with creditors, some having stopped the supply of goods to the business, my father agreed to work hard and pay all the creditors their due, provided the shop license was transferred onto his name. In other words, he wanted the shop to be his. He wanted my mother to join him in the shop full-time, and nobody was allowed to take anything from the shop for the house or kitchen. Anything that went to the house had to be recorded in a notebook. Bread, sugar, flour, butter, biscuits, oil, paraffin was rationed. The family was not happy, but my grandfather had to agree or face insolvency. With the new restrictions and limits in place, he was able to settle with all the creditors and save money as well. He closed most of the merchants' accounts and negotiated prices and bought for cash. The process took a few years. My elder brother, Aziz, left school and came to assist in the shop. With all praise to the Almighty, the business flourished, but the property on which the shop was on remained part of my grandfather's estate when he passed away. My father diligently paid a nominal rental to Afuma every month. My father's siblings wanted their share of the property, for which they were entitled, but unfortunately split the once united family. With the restrictions imposed by my father, visitors and holidaymakers were few and far between. My father tried in vain to get the family to accept his offer on the property, but they could not agree on a figure. At one point, my father offered the family just short of 500,000 rands, but they refused his offer and demanded 1,000,000 rands. Sadly, the property was eventually auctioned and went for far less than what the family had expected. My brother, Ismail, bought the property at the auction. He still runs the business together with his son. In the past few years, they have had numerous burglaries and robberies, but Ismail has persevered and remained in Manderston. 25 ph. In recent time, many changes have taken place in Manderston. The train service has been replaced by a far more efficient taxi service. Many spaza shops have opened and farmers have started their own tuck shops to cater for their workers. All of this to the detriment of business in Manderston. Today, the business survives on providing the bare necessities to the locals. The locals travel to Pietermaritzburg for any luxury purchases they need to make. All praise to the Almighty, Ismail is not rich, but he is content. His children have all excelled in Islamic education. His son Maulana Muhammad Vanker travels the world on lecture tours. Ismail has many alims, alimas, and hufaz among his children. Abdul Haq Vanker, Uncle Max. Uncle Max married Hadra Motala from Motavarachia. Hadra's mother and my Nanima are sisters from the Barmenia family. Uncle Max had 2 sons and a daughter. The eldest is Mohammed, a doctor in Pietermaritzburg, and Ahmed Syed, who has relocated to the UK. His daughter, Soraya, is married and lives in the US. Abdulhamid, Nalabai, Whitey. The youngest of the children of Musa Vanker and Afuma. He married Ayesha Asmal and had 2 children, a daughter Shireen and son Yunus. Yunus passed away very young. Shireen is married to Ahmed Kaka and they have 3 grown-up children. Yunus had 2 children. His widow Bilkis has remarried and has more children. Uncle Whitey was a victim of a robbery in his shop in Alice Street, Durban, and sustained a gunshot. He sadly passed away from his injuries. Abdullah Vanker, Charles, had 1 daughter, Zohra. My father had 1 daughter, Farida, me. Abdul Haq Vanker, Max, had 1 daughter, Soraya. Abdul Hamid Qasim Vanker, Whitey, had 1 daughter, Shireen. 26 Pa Nanima, my Nanima, to 26 February 1979, daughter of Dawood Barmania, was born in Umzimkulu. She was 6 or 7 years old when she was sent to Motavarachia in India to be educated, as there were no schools or madrasa in Umzimkulu. As per the custom at the time, her marriage was already arranged with a Ghulam Hussein Ismail Timol, her father's sister's son. He was a very bright young man, well educated and very good looking. The father-in-law, the wealthy Dawood Barmania, arranged for the daughter and son-in-law to come to South Africa. They stayed in Umzimkhulu for a couple of years, and Mr. Dawood Barmania bought a huge roaring business for the son-in-law, G.H. Timal, in Wasbank, near Dundee in northern Natal. Money was pouring in and customers traded with gold coins. This was probably in the early 1900s. The Timals lived like royalty and bought a beautiful house in Dundee and a new car. Hupmobile, a car that everyone envied. They traveled to Durban often and generally had a good time. My Nanima had accumulated a box of gold jewelry, some given to her by her father and some brought from India. In India, the Barmanias lived in a mansion and had summer villas in Calcutta and Hyderabad. About 5 years into the business in Wasbank, the Barmanias came to visit the family and found the business in a total state of neglect and heavily in debt. The Barmanias promptly kicked out their Timal son-in-law lock, stock and barrel. The Timals landed in Durban with 6 or 7 children and moved into a flat in Prince Edward Street. My Nana, G.H. Timal, took a job at Lockat Brothers in Commercial Road, Durban. Somehow, they settled in with all the children until they were struck by the tuberculosis epidemic, similar to the COVID-19 epidemic we experienced recently. Within a few years, the Timals lost most of their children. 2 were married. Chodiappa was married to G.H. Kathrada passed away during childbirth, leaving 6 children. Hashim, father of Khadija Bibi, who was married to a Hajra from Mauritius, who also passed away of TB before Bibi was born around 1937 or 1938. Hajra passed away soon after Bibi was born. Nanima brought Bibi up as her own daughter. Our Nana worked hard at Lockett's and proved himself to be a capable worker with his employers. He read in the newspaper of plots of land being sold in Riverside near the Umjani River mouth in Durban North. He suggested to Nanima that they should purchase a plot and build a family home. Nanima was ecstatic, but they did not have sufficient cash. Nana Baji suggested they sell the jewelry that she had accumulated. Although very sentimental, Nanima agreed to part with the jewelry if 27 PAG they could live more comfortably. She was excited, visited the building site often, and planted fruit trees, flowers, and shrubs long before the house was completed. They moved into the new house in 1941, the year I was born. Then came the Second World War, WW2. Everything became scarce. Lockat Brothers, where my Nana worked, needed fabric, especially suit fabric. Supplies were not coming through from their regular suppliers. Since my Nana was previously from India, he had family in India, so his employers chose him to go on a mission to India and source fabric for their wholesale business. While he was away, a complete blackout was implemented because of the war. South Africans had to turn off all outside lights and blacken windows to avoid air raids. Riverside was very isolated from central Durban at the time. Their home did not have immediate neighbors, and Nanima was scared of living in those circumstances. She approached the Locketts for assistance. The Locketts had just completed a block of flats in central Durban on the corner of Grey Street and Lorne Street. Since Nana was going to be away for many months, they suggested Nanima move into the flat. Nobody could tell when Nana would return from India. The family received letters from India saying that Mr. G.H. Timal had taken another wife in India. She was my Nanima's cousin and was supposed to marry Nanima's younger brother some years previously. That marriage did not materialize when the family learnt of the bride having broken her leg and that she walked with a limp. This girl was beautiful and very talented. We do not know the exact circumstances, but Nana was in India and this lady wanted to go to South Africa. So Nana married Nanima's cousin, Foiben, in India before embarking on the return trip to South Africa. They arrived in Durban with a baby girl. Nana sent word to Nanima to return to Riverside since he was back home. She was devastated with the news and refused to listen to any reasoning. When Nana came to Lorne Street, Nanima would throw things at him and chase him away. Nana had no choice but to go to Riverside with his new wife and child. Nanima took her son Ahmed out of school and sent him to work for Lockat Brothers. Nanima forced them to give him the job because they were the ones that sent Nana to India for so long, and she was holding them responsible for him taking on another wife in India. After a lengthy period, her mind had cooled down. She approached her children, her son Ahmed, my mother Aisha, and the youngest Zubaydah, to not break ties with their father. Ahmed and Zubaydah took a long time to come to terms with what was happening in the family. My mother, Aisha, was very fond of her father, so slowly established a good relationship with her father and the father's other wife and child. She visited them in Umgeni whenever they were in Durban. She also encouraged Ahmed and Zubaydah to visit their father. 28 PH. Nana arranged with the corner store to supply some groceries for the family. There was a limit of 3 £10 on the account. Nanima sent Bibi to buy the daily requirements like bread, milk, butter, sugar, and flour. To supplement her income, Nanima started a small business from home. She made popcorn and sold to school children from the Kathiawad school next door. She made sweet popcorn, which sold very well. She also made a spicy-flavored popcorn that was a hit with the school children. She found that some children were eating Dutch apples, so she found a source, a group of colored youngsters prepared to climb the trees in First Avenue and bring bags full to her. She sold 4 Dutch apples with some salt and chili powder for a penny. Popcorn was also a penny. Sweet popcorn was sold for a tikkie. The little business helped to bring in some well-needed cash into the house. When Ahmed got married, his wife introduced flavored ice blocks, another good seller for the home business. Nana Baji started coming to Lorne Street for lunch every day at 1 p.m. They started talking to each other once more, but only as cousins, not husband and wife. Baji would put the radio on to listen to the 1 a.m. news, discuss the news, and went off to work again. He always parked his car in Lorne Street in front of the tailor shop. Baji continued paying the £3.10 every month, and they never discussed finances. When the price of groceries increased, Nanima would tell Bibi to write a note to Baji. I will never forget his response. I don't have a money tree. My brother Aziz and I lived in Lorne Street, so my mother would bring some essential groceries with her whenever she came to visit. She would bring chicken, flour, sugar, tea, and cooking oil from the Manderston shop. A few years into working at Lockett's, Ahmed was retrenched. He was responsible for the monthly rent and electricity bill. He also had a wife and children to support, so my mother suggested that he open a shop of his own. Premises were available at a building in Lorne Street. That was the birth of Timmy's Tea Room in Lorne Street. As soon as the business took off, Baji immediately put an end to his £3.10 contribution to the family groceries, saying that while he still remained a worker, Ahmed was a shop owner and must support the family. He said he was unable to support 2 homes. Nanima was devastated, but somehow continued to manage. Baji's daily visits to Lorne Street were immediately stopped. We hardly saw him unless we went to Umgeni. He now had 2 children from his new wife. Both girls, Zora, Bangori, and Amina. Despite the happenings of the past, Nanima retained a soft spot for Baji. Considering all that they had been through from the business in Dundee, arriving in Durban with more than a handful of children, and the loss of some of their children in quick succession. Baji was an enlightened man and well-educated. He wanted the same of his children. Since there was no school in Dundee, he arranged with the local African school to accommodate his children. They traveled to and from school in a horse carriage. When they arrived in Durban, he enrolled his children in schools in Central 29 PH Durban. It was not common at the time for Muslim girls to attend school in uniform, short dresses, and no pants. My mother Aisha and her sister Zubaydah completed Standard 6 at a girls' bay school in Durban. My mother must have finished school around 1935. Nanima's daughter Mariam, Choti Appa, married a Kathrada, and she lived with the extended Kathrada family in Pine Street, Durban. Nanima had already lost 2 children, Hashim and Rabia, when Choti Appa passed during childbirth. She left behind 6 young children, Zora, Hawa Bibi, Ismail, Sarah, Yusuf, and Hajra. Aisha, Rabia, and Gori were taught bookkeeping by Baji himself. My mother did all the bookwork for the Manderston shop when my father took over the business. Zubaydah, 7th April 1930 to 26th April 1989, was the youngest and of the siblings. Mahmoud Vahed, a tailor with a shop near their flat in Lorne Street, approached Nanima with good intentions, saying that he wanted to marry Zubaydah. The family was not happy. since he was much older than her, and there were rumors that he was previously married and had numerous children. Zubaydah, however, insisted to marry Mr. Vahed. A small wedding was held, and they moved into a flat in Carlost Street. Mahmoud Vahed furnished the flat, including all new appliances. He always drove a fancy car, and they traveled the country on holiday regularly. He taught Zubaydah to do simple needlework in the tailor shop, and they lived a happy life together. About 6 months after the wedding, a woman pitched up at the tailor shop and literally left 5 young children, claiming they were Mahmoud Vahed's children. The youngest of the children was still in diapers and under a year old. Mr. Vahed admitted the kids were his and that he had separated from their mother about a year back. Zubaydah's world came crashing down on her. She had naively married and had no idea how to maintain a house, let alone 5 children that were not hers. Nanima used to send food for her and Mahmoud. With 5 children, 2 girls and 3 boys, the load was far more than she could handle. The kids called Zubaydah Auntie and their father Daddy. These are the names we used for them from there onwards. Daddy was not happy when Auntie complained about having to look after so many children on her own. The flat they live in had a single bedroom and a small lounge. The daughters, Zubi and Hajra, must have been around 12 or 14 years old at the time. 4 of the kids enrolled at schools in Durban, while the youngest came to the tailor shop. It took a long time for Auntie to accept he children. Nanima continued to send trays of food for Auntie and Daddy daily. The elder of the girls went to a lady nearby to learn to cook. Daddy was an expert tailor and earned well. They lived comfortably, he drove a nice car and spent on his family. Daddy sometimes went through tough periods with a low income, but Daddy was able to work hard, sometimes through the night in his tailor shop, and was back on his feet in a short time. His 2 daughters took care of their younger siblings. I became good friends with the daughters. The girls did all the housework, cooking and cleaning, and took 30 pagh advantage of Daddy when he was in money. He would buy them expensive clothing and shoes, and would give Auntie money to spend as well. The girls grew up to be beautiful young ladies. They learnt to sew their own clothes and were married by the time they were 16 or 17 years old. Auntie maintained good relationships with the daughters, even though they had been through some tough times. One of the sons passed away very young, while the remaining 2 married and moved on. Auntie's first child, Yasmin, was born about 16 years into her marriage with Daddy. Yasmin was brilliant in school. She enrolled at university and drove her father's car. All of a sudden, the family was shocked with the untimely death of Daddy. The daughters came from Johannesburg for the father's funeral and remained in Durban for a few days after the funeral. My Nana Baji, G.H. Timol, my mother's father, lived happily with his second wife and 2 daughters in Riverside, Umgini, Durban. True to Baji's tradition, the girls worked hard in school and excelled in their schoolwork. Baji was very proud of his girls. He believed girls must not be deprived of the opportunity to study. While still in high school, the girls lost their mother, leaving them to fend for themselves. Very quickly, the young sisters took over the running of the house, including doing the cooking and cleaning. They would get up early in the morning to do the household chores before leaving for school. They also had to take care of Baji, who was getting old. Both sisters enrolled at Salisbury College and qualified as school teachers soon afterwards. They grew up to be independent, learnt to drive, and survive without a mother and with an aging father. Baji would often write letters to my mother Aisha. In one such letter, her asked my mother to convince Nanima to return to the Riverside family home. Nanima did not want to hear anything of that sort. She maintained that when she was young and beautiful, Baji chose to marry another woman. Now that she was old, she did not need him anymore. To add insult to injury, the fact that he married her cousin was very painful for her. Ironically, this second wife happened to be the sister of Baji's son-in-law. Ismail Susiwala married my mother's sister, who also passed away in the TB epidemic. We are not sure of our aunt's name, but she had given birth to a baby girl just prior to her passing away. The child was named Dulari, after an Indian actor and singer that was famous at the time. Dulari passed away very young. Ismail Susiwala married a Hafaji woman after his wife, my mother's sister, passed away. Everyone has moved on, and everything is forgotten and forgiven. My mum loved her father very much, in spite of all that transpired over the years. She loves her two half-sisters, and we continue in the same fashion. Blood is thicker than water, living proof. 31. Pagium Zimkulu. Mr. Ahmed Barmania, who was once engaged to a Susiwala girl, eventually married my father's sister, Khadija Bari Foy, eldest daughter of Musa Vanker and Afuma. The engagement to the Susiwala girl was broken because he heard the Susiwala girl had a leg injury and walked with a limp. This Susiwala girl eventually married Mr. G.H. Timal, my nana, as his second wife while he was on business in India. The older brother, Mohammed Barmania, was married to a Vaid cousin, who we called Appa Bai. They had one son and two daughters. Fatima was married to Ghulam Mohammed Vanker, son of Musa Vanker. Zuleika married Mr. Adam. Dawood married an Asmal woman. Mohammed Barmania was well educated and he had an MA degree in economics. In the 1940s, he was the first person of color to address the South African House of Parliament. It was a matter of dealing with the acquisition of land by the Indians in South Africa. Mohammed Barmania went to Cape Town on holiday and never returned. Years later, his family heard that he had taken another wife in Cape Town and had 4 or 5 children with her. His first wife, the mother of his children, lived in Durban with our uncle Ghulam Mohammed Vanker in Tills Crescent. She passed away, having never seen her husband since he moved to Cape Town. His son visited him in Cape Town, and there was some contact between his children. Because of his association with politics, there is a road, Barmania Road in Athlone, Cape Town, named after him. My mother, Aisha, daughter of G.H. Timal. Aisha Appa, sometimes Asappa, as she was fondly known, was born when her parents lived in the Dundee area on the 3rd December 1920. She was beautiful and intelligent. At an early age, she insisted on going to school. Her parents enrolled her at a local Bantu school and hired a horse and cart to transport her to school. When the family moved to Durban, she attended a girls' school in Durban. At the time, it was not common for Muslim girls to attend school, but her parents supported her efforts to attend school. She was among the very few Muslim girls to graduate from primary school, having completed Standard 6, Grade 8 today. She spoke English and Zulu fluently. In those days, most school teachers were European, so she therefore spoke English perfectly. Ma was good-natured and modern in her thinking. Her father taught her bookkeeping, so she was able to do all the administration work for the business in Manderston. She was a talented dressmaker and made beautiful dresses for herself and me. I learnt dressmaking from her when I was very young. 32. PAG. She had excellent business acumen and worked hard in the shop. She would buy and sell livestock, sheep and goats, to the locals in Manderston. Often she bought fabric offcuts from clothing factories, made garments, and sold these in the shop. She established good relationships with people she came into contact with and had many friends even among the European community in Manderston. When we, her children, were married and gone, my parents would visit us all regularly. They never came empty-handed, always bearing gifts like cleaned farm chicken, eggs, mealies, and fresh farm milk. We looked forward to their visits. They were extremely fond of their grandchildren. Ma loved gardening and had hundreds of potted plants on the veranda of the house in Manderston. She became an expert in repurposing any container she could lay her hand on to use as pots for her plants. The Manderston property was also home to an orchard of fruit trees. Ma was able to identify plants, trees, and shrubs and visited nurseries all over. My brother Aziz joined my father in the business when he was very young. He was very bright in school, but unfortunately was not encouraged enough to further his studies. Dad planned to retire as soon as Aziz was ready to take over the business. That did not materialize until many decades later. Aziz took over another business in Thornville, a neighboring village, and then later opened a linen store in Pietermaritzburg. It was eventually Ismail, a younger brother, that took over the Manderston shop. My parents traveled a lot, in South Africa and abroad. They had visited Johannesburg and Cape Town many times. They made several trips of Hajj and Umrah over the years. In 1966, my parents went on their first trip abroad. They spent Ramadan in Mecca and Medina and stayed on until Hajj. From there, they visited all the capital cities in the Middle East, most of the tourist attractions in Europe and North Africa, and finally India and Pakistan. They loved to travel and always brought many gifts from all their destinations. I was fortunate. Being the only daughter, I received the best of the gifts. My dad was fond of reading and had an exceptional general knowledge. He knew the history of the British royal family in detail and who would succeed in becoming the next king or queen. Anyone could talk to him for hours on end without getting bored. We learnt a lot from him. When I was young, he said that every person must know how to fill in the details on a form. To this day, I am aware of many people that cannot complete their personal details on a form. Both Ma and Papa taught me how to wrap a parcel. I can pack a kilogram of flour with a sheet of paper and some sticky tape. He also taught us how to address a package for posting. There were no courier services in those days, so all parcels had to be correctly addressed and taken to the post office for posting. While we were driving, Papa would identify trees on the roadside. He would point out which were gum trees, pine trees, and wattle trees. He would tell us what the various 33 PAG timbers were used for. He also told us how long it took for the trees to mature. The same with the various agricultural crops we saw along the road. He would tell us which were mealies, sugar cane, potatoes, beans, or tomatoes. He showed us tobacco growing in the eastern Transvaal, now Mpumalanga. We were never allowed to sleep in the car. He would keep the conversation going until we reached our destination. That is how I learned about our family history. He would encourage us to be thrifty and live simple lives and not show wealth to people outside. My parents invested in property and encouraged us to do the same. They maintained that real estate would always appreciate in value, unlike cars or money. I enjoyed Papa's talks about geography and natural resources. He knew what was mined in the various countries of the world. Although we did not show much interest, he told us the details of the Second World War. He knew everything about Pearl Harbor and Nagasaki. Manderston is a small farming district between Thornville and Camperdown. Initially, there was a railway station, a post office, and even a telephone exchange in Manderston. The Manderston shop postal address was P.O. Box 1 Manderston. The telephone number was 1. As time progressed, these facilities were incorporated into the neighboring villages, and Manderston remained a farming area. Although the railway station did close down, the train service remained for many years. Passenger and goods trains would stop in Manderston. These provided a reliable service to Pietermaritzburg and Durban. This came to an end when road transport for goods and passengers became popular and more reliable. There is presently no railway line in the Manderston. The nearest railway stations today is situated in Thornville to the west and Umlas Road in the east. Water was a scarce commodity in Manderston, and most farming in the area was dependent on rainfall for irrigation. Some farmers had boreholes, while others had streams or natural springs on their farms. The main crop in Manderston was mealies, and there were a few dairy and beef farms in the area. Today, sugarcane is the major crop in Manderston. Chicken farming were pioneered by rainbow chickens in the area. Unfortunately, with the advent on imported chickens in the country, the rainbow farms have been closing down one at a time. 34 PAG. As recently as around 20 years ago, piped water was introduced to Manderston. Electricity was introduced to Manderston in the 1950s. Prior to that, it was mostly paraffin for illumination, heating, and cooking. Our house always had a wood and coal stove before the advent of electricity in the area. Pit toilets, long drop, were outside, always far from the house until septic tanks and soak pits were introduced in the 1970s. Manderston was home to a prisoner of war camp during the WW2. My father became friendly with the Italian prisoners there, and they showed him how to build a water heater using a drum and wood fire. These were recently replaced with the electric geyser. Prior to the minibus taxis, farm workers did not travel outside of Manderston. All their purchases were made at our shop. My dad offered some customers credit facilities where they would purchase goods from the shop on account and settle their accounts on payday. The shop stocked groceries, clothing, shoes, school uniforms, hardware, and bicycles. All goods from traditional wholesale merchants were initially delivered by rail and later by road. Today, the cash and carry type wholesalers have replaced the traditional wholesalers. Stock for the shop is now bought, paid for, and collected from suppliers in Pietermaritzburg. Customers now travel to Pietermaritzburg by taxi and do the majority of their buying from brand name stores in shopping malls. The Manderston shop is now more like a convenience store, stocking only essential and perishable items. With many burglaries and robberies during the past decade or so, customers are now served through a hatch most of the time. Only known people are allowed inside the shop. My brother Aziz and his wife Sarah lived in Manderston for many years. The move to Pietermaritzburg in the 1970s. My brother Ismail and his wife Ruqayya still live in Manderston with their son Aslam and his family. Ismail lays claim to 2 records. He says he is the oldest person in Manderston, 74 years in 2023, and is the oldest resident in Manderston, living there since his birth in 1949. 35. PAG. Notable family members. Maulana Mohammed Vanker, son of Ismail Vanker. He travels the world on lecture tours and escorts people on various excursions to significant Islamic sites throughout the world. Resides in Durban. 2. Imran Vanker, son of Aziz Vanker, a chartered accountant, was the Auditor General for Gauteng Province. Was auditor at United Nations in New York for many years. Presently head of the country's audit regulatory body, IRBA. Resides in Johannesburg. 3. Ibrahim Vanker, my brother, cardiac thoracic surgeon, and very active with Islamic propagation. 4. Ahmed Bawa, my son-in-law, nuclear physicist, political activist, has headed various universities and science research teams in South Africa and abroad. Presently at a university in Tokyo, Japan. Notable Manderston and district residents. 1. Mrs. Nell, an Afrikaner woman in a man's body. Master of all trades. Never kept a husband for more than a few months. She could fix a sewing machine, a borehole pump, or a car that did not start. She was well acquainted with Dutch medicine and had home remedies for most minor illnesses. It was through her recommendations that some patent medicines were stocked in the shop. Mrs. Nell hired prisoners, people that were jailed for short periods for petty crimes, to work on her farm for a pittance, 25 cents a day. She would accuse them of a crime before their release, thereby increasing their prison term. One such prisoner eventually murdered her, dumped her body in her car trunk, and attempted to drive away. He was unable to drive properly, and the car was found smashed on the roadside a day or so later. 2. The Maharaj brothers from Thornville, all were bookkeepers by trade. One brother, Thuntun, was a Hindu pundit and bought a new Ford car every year for decades in succession. He did all the government tax returns for the Manderston shop. 3. The Sithapersad family. Their one son, Bansi, was a regular in the Manderston household. He acted as a driver for my father more than once when he visited friends and family in the Transvaal. My brothers still have contact with him. 4. The Singh family, an extended family that lived between Manderston and Thornville. They were regulars in the Manderston shop. One of them was a self-taught mechanic. He repaired my father's car whenever something went wrong. 36. 5. The Shuttleworth brothers, formerly from Hilton. All of them worked for the railways in different positions. They bought and moved into a small holding in Manderston, and one brother, Tony Jambok, became very friendly with my father. When they first moved to Manderston, they did not have the resources to build a house. They lived in an old, dilapidated caravan until they were able to build a tiny but functional house. Another brother, Derek, was friendly with Aslam and left his plot of land to Aslam when he passed away. Presently, Aslam is building a small mosque on the plot. 37. Ph.